Lakeland Public Television, the Bemidji Pioneer, the Brainerd Dispatch, and KAXE Northern Community Radio are proud to present Debate Night 2014, a look at our area legislative candidates. And now the State House of Representatives District 5B debate. Your moderator tonight is Warren Larson.
Good evening and welcome to Debate 2014, 6 state legislative debates over 4 nights. We're at Lakeland Public Television Studio in Bemidji. Our candidates tonight are Justin Eichorn, our Republican candidate, and Tom Anzelc, our Democratic candidate. Our panel for tonight's debate are Dennis Wyman, Lakeland Public Television News Director, Zach Kaiser, Bemidji Pioneer reporter, Scott Hall, Public Affairs Director for Northern Community Radio, KAXE and KBXE. Our rules for tonight. Each candidate will be given 3 minutes for opening comments. The panel will ask questions after opening comments. Some will be their own questions, other may be from the public. The candidates will rotate the order they speak, beginning with opening comments and finishing with closing comments. Each candidate gets 2 minutes to answer the questions. Each candidate will have a 1-minute rebuttal opportunity. Questions continue until we are about 50 minutes into the debate when we move to the closing comments. Closing comments will be 2 minutes. So let's begin. Our first question tonight, well actually we're going to start with opening comments, excuse me. Our first opening comments tonight will come from Justin Eichorn.
First of all, thank you very much. I want to thank Lakeland Public Television for putting these debates on. It's very important for the community and everybody here to be able to hear the issues, so I greatly appreciate everything you guys are doing tonight. Thank you very much. My name's Justin Eichorn. I'm running for House District 5B. I live in Grand Rapids. I've been there a good portion of my life. I went to school at Itasca Community College and then finished my 4-year degree in organizational management and leadership at Concordia University in St. Paul. I have a wonderful wife, Brittany. I have four young children. My oldest will turn 6 next month. My youngest is only 4 months old, so I don't get a lot of sleep, but it's been very, very enjoyable. I absolutely love being a dad. It's one of my favorite things to do. Like I said, I grew up here in Grand Rapids. I've been involved in the business community there. My family owns an outdoor store there. I was a previous business owner in Grand Rapids. Having been and lived there my entire life, I have a pretty good hold on what's going on in the community and things that can better ourselves in our community to make 5B a better place and Minnesota a better state to live. So again, thank you very much, and I'll pass it over.
All right. Mr. Tom Anzelc, your opening comments.
Thank you very much. There are 134 members of the Minnesota House of Representatives. Since 2006, it's been my honor and a privilege to represent a portion of northern Minnesota and to be one of those 134 representatives of the people. In St. Paul, we are considered state representatives and state senators. But everyone who comes to St. Paul, especially from northern Minnesota, and all of my colleagues in the House of Representatives know very well that I am the representative from northern Minnesota. I know northern Minnesota. I've lived here all of my life. I live on a little lake in the Chippewa National Forest. I know the lifestyle. I know what today's young families need and must go through in order to educate their children, in order to make a living, and in order to obtain a quality of life that all of us want for all of our children and our grandchildren. It isn't easy representing an area of Minnesota that is so diverse, that is so far in distance from the capital of our state, St. Paul, and we are outnumbered in the Minnesota House of Representatives due to population. There are literally a dozen members of the House of Representatives who represent the entire top third of Minnesota. So when citizens go to vote on November 4th, they need to study the candidates, study their issues, and be sure that from northern Minnesota we send the best representatives of the people of northern Minnesota to St. Paul that we possibly can. I believe I have those capabilities, I have those experiences, and I have represented the people of northern Minnesota first.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Anzelc. And now we'll move on to questions. Our first question would come from Zach Kaiser.
Thank you, Warren. This one's on transportation. Do you support an increase in the gas tax to fund renovations to Minnesota's roads and bridges?
Okay, thank you, Zach. That first question goes to Mr. Anzelc.
I have in the past supported a excise tax on gasoline. I consider transportation to be one of the major unfinished pieces of business of the last biennium, and join with Governor Dayton in working to find a fair, equitable way of improving rural northern Minnesota transportation for our roads and bridges. I said that I've been a supporter of the gas tax in the past. I'm not so sure that that is the proper funding mechanism going forward, especially if my Republican colleagues refuse to support and put up any votes to make a gasoline tax possible. I'm looking for other mechanisms that will more fairly address northern Minnesota's transportation needs. We need better maintenance and care of our bridges and rural roads, for our forestry, and for our citizenry, but I'm not sure that the gas tax is the proper and fair way to do it.
Thank you, Mr. Anzelc. Mr. Eichorn?
Well, roads and bridges are obviously one of our most important assets, and very important that we continue to maintain those, improve them, have additional roads and bridges as needed. But a gas tax is not the way to do it. We are already taxed to death. If you go and look at the amount of money you're spending on gas, the amount that goes towards taxes, federal, state, county, is already so exorbitant. We don't need another tax. Most of northern Minnesota cannot afford another gas tax. We're already at $3 a gallon. We've been pushing up $4 a gallon before. The people in northern Minnesota can't afford that. I will not support any type of gas tax increase. We've got, like I said before, you've got the wheelage tax now. There's all these other taxes and fees that already go into the roads. And the last biennium, the legislator had a chance to maybe increase the funding for roads and bridges. Maybe it was increased a little bit through some of these wheelage taxes and stuff like that. But we saw much higher increases in welfare benefits and other benefits than roads and bridges. If roads and bridges were a true priority, we would be allocating those funds from the state that are available to already do that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Eichorn. Mr. Anzelc, rebuttal?
I would argue that middle-class Minnesotans benefit from investments in transportation, public schools, and public amenities. I would argue that Minnesota's tax system is more progressive than most. And I would argue that the wealthiest among us were asked during the last biennium, those making $250,000 a year or more, they were asked to pay a little bit more. They did. Minnesota, as a result, is outperforming most of the rest of the states of the country. But the transportation issue remains something that we have not solved. And frankly, my opponent and I are in agreement that a gasoline tax may not be the proper mechanism.
Okay, Mr. Eichorn, a rebuttal?
A gasoline tax may not be, I feel that's incorrect. A gasoline tax is not the correct direction to go. And you're right, you did cause more Minnesotans to pay more. It wasn't just the wealthiest Minnesotans, it's all Minnesotans ended up paying more. And at the end of the day, we're talking about the gas tax right now, and I don't know any middle-class Minnesota family that can afford to pay any amount of additional fee in gas or any additional fee from the state at this point.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Eichorn. Okay, our next question would come from Scott Hall.
Thanks, Warren. Minnesota in the last 4 years has been very successful in job creation, but many of those jobs are low-wage jobs. So what could the state do to create better paying jobs?
Okay, thanks you, Scott. Mr. Eichorn.
What can the state do to create better paying jobs? I think right now we're seeing a lot of larger companies moving out of state. I think part of the problem there is the high cost of doing business in Minnesota, unfortunately, and a lot of these companies are moving for more tax-friendly states, including Wisconsin, Iowa, North Dakota, South Dakota, and many of the southern states. I think if we're going to be competitive with other states on a national level, we need to look at where other states are taxing their corporations and be more in line with that. Right now, again, it's exorbitant. I don't advocate that, they shouldn't pay some taxes, because they should. Everybody should, pay some taxes. We have agreed on that as a society. But in order to be competitive with other states, we need to get ourselves in line with some of them in order to keep those companies here, keep the higher paying jobs in. And for us in northern Minnesota, some of the mining jobs, I think we need to get some of the government regulation out of the way so we can get those mines fully running and get those high paying, good middle class jobs going again in Minnesota.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Eichorn. Mr. Anzelc.
Minnesota is outperforming all but a handful of states in this great country. We're creating more jobs. We're seeing more economic development. And on the Iron Range, for the first time in decades, we're seeing an increase in mining jobs due to the fantastic accomplishments of a fledgling little company owned by a couple of Iron Range entrepreneurs. That company, of course, is Magnetation. One only has to look at our neighboring state of Wisconsin, and you can easily see whose policies are working. The policies of Scott Walker, who is interested in reducing wages, taking benefits away from workers, reducing public amenities, or the policies of Governor Mark Dayton, who has led an investment in public amenities, public education, higher education. I think the proof is in the job creation numbers. I'm very, very proud of what we've done.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Anzelc. Mr. Eichorn, a rebuttal?
Well, Mr. Walker may have done some good or bad things. I'm worried about northern Minnesota. On Magnetation that you mentioned, they were looking at investing some additional funds, but instead went to Ohio because of regulation and a better tax climate. The Iron Range, according to the Herald Review, has a higher unemployment rate than the rest of the state, and Grand Rapids itself, if you pull that out of the Iron Range numbers, has an even higher unemployment rate. I'm seeing a loss of jobs in Minnesota, and I'm hearing more of a loss of jobs than I am a gain of jobs because of companies moving for more friendly tax climates.
Okay, Mr. Anzelc, rebuttal?
Magnetation is building a pellet plant in Indiana, not Ohio. They're both in the Midwest. They're close to one another, but it's Indiana. And that decision was made by Magnetation's partner, AK Steel, that wanted that pellet making facility near its steel making facility. The benefit to that pellet making facility is that we have under construction at the present time Plant 4 at north of Coleraine, which will provide the feedstock, the concentrate, to feed that pellet plant in Indiana. I know mining. I was born and raised in a mining location. I was born and raised in a mining company house. I know mining, and I know of the good that mining can accomplish and will be accomplished by Magnetation.
Thank you, Mr. Anzelc. Okay, our next question would come from Dennis Wyman.
And ironically, it involves mining. The proposed Polymet mine has been the subject of debate for years, with the usual conflict between economic benefit and environmental concerns. Walk us through your thought process as you try to weigh one against the other to determine which side you come down on in such a situation.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. That question goes to Mr. Anzelc.
As the chair of the Iron Range Legislative Delegation, I can tell the viewers at home that all 8 of us, all 3 senators and 5 representatives, are in support of responsible permitting, regulation, science, and technology that will lead to the development of the Polymet project. I can tell you that we believe in the science and we believe in the technology. I can also tell you that the day of settling public policy issues by pounding the other side into submission is no longer a proper way to resolve public policy issues. Polymet has been hard. It should be hard. Mining is a difficult economic endeavor. Mining needs to be done right. All of us in our delegation from northern Minnesota believe that this project can be done right. I might add that much has been made lately of the length of time that it's taken to get it right. And I would submit I would much rather have it being done in a reasonable and responsible manner rather than to rush it through and to end up in court where the lawyers make a ton of money and we end up in 6 years of protracted disagreement, acrimony, and only the people of the range lose because we need those 350 jobs.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Anzelc. Mr. Eichorn.
Tom is correct in saying that the Iron Range does need those 350 jobs. They're very important to the northern Minnesota economy. But unlike him, I don't think Polymet should be hard. It should be a simple decision. I realize that there are a lot of environmental issues and permitting issues here. We do need to trust the science and the technology to some degree, but there needs to be some kind of balance. If we drag this thing out too long, at what point are they going to say, throw their hands up in the air and say, forget it, we're just done? You know, I don't think we're there yet. But I think we need to help move this process along and do what we can as a state to make sure that the permitting is done faster and moved along, because those 350 plus jobs are well needed by northern Minnesota. And I think that Polymet intends to do it responsibly and appropriately. I'm sure they have all the procedures in place to make sure that everything is cleaned up when they're done. You know, that right now they've got the EPA looking at them, they've got the state version of the EPA looking at them, they've got local governments looking at them. I don't think it's going to get out of whack. I think that's something we really need to get moving along as quick as we can.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Eichorn. Mr. Anzelc, rebuttal.
Science and technology should be our guide to resolving this issue, not politicians. Politicians have only managed to polarize the issue. It's not polarization and acrimony that is going to result in a sound decision based on science and technology. And once again, I grew up in a mining family. I lived in a mining location. I saw the benefits of mining. I also saw what happens when mines close. And I also saw what happens when mines are not required to protect and safeguard and care for our water and our air. I'm confident that this can be done with Polymet, and I would just ask my opponent to be just a little bit patient.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Anzelc. Mr. Eichorn, rebuttal.
I think that if you want to look at somebody who's politicized the issue, I think we can look at the environmental lobby has politicized this issue more than the Republicans or Democrats or any other group. we're not in the 1950s still. I think that the technology and science has come a long way from some of these mines that have closed down that we're maybe referencing. And I think PolyMet has a much better plan and much better technology going forward to do this in a responsible manner.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Eichorn. Our next question would come from Zach Kaiser.
Thank you. This question is on labor. Would you support a right-to-work law in Minnesota?
Okay, thank you, Zach. That question goes to Mr. Eichorn.
I would support a right-to-work law in Minnesota, and it's not about any union, it's about an individual. I think an individual should have the ultimate say in whether or not they want to join a union when they, take a new job. I think that, not having that hurts the average Minnesotan. It's not for everybody. I think everybody has the right to join a union if they want to, and for some people it really works. But for the people it doesn't work, they should have that opportunity to have gainful employment without having to pay their union dues every month. If they've got to bargain in a different way or operate under a different set of rules, maybe that's fine. But I would support a right to work policy in the state of Minnesota.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Eichorn. Mr. Anzelc.
The spin doctors who coined the phrase right to work really mean to workers, we're going to ask you to give you the right to work for less. That's what they're talking about. They're talking about busting unions. They're talking about taking rights away from men and women. They're talking about taking rights away from workers to voluntarily associate and form alliances so that employers are not allowed the draconian ability to treat workers separately and unequally. Collective bargaining is what has made this country. Collective bargaining is part of our history of northeastern Minnesota. Collective bargaining is what has raised so many lifeboats, me included. I would not be where I am today, nor would I have had the quality of life that I have had, nor would I have been able to raise my 3 daughters the way we have without collective bargaining in the labor movement. It's preposterous in a time when corporate profits and wealth is being lumped and linked only to people at the top of the labor market chain, that one would even suggest abolishing the labor movement with this so-called right-to-work concept.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Anzelc. Mr. Eichorn, rebuttal?
Well, since you brought up Wisconsin earlier, I see with their right-to-work policies, there are many, many people that are choosing to leave their union, to be represented by themselves, and I don't see in any case where they're being treated any differently. In the state of Minnesota, we have many protections for individuals that you receive with or without union representation. There's a lot of people that don't want to pay dues every month to a union for something that they don't feel is truly representing their beliefs. The right to work issue is about the individual freedom, not about taking any workers' freedom away or a union's freedom away or a company's freedom away. It's about the individual having their own right to choose for themselves.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Eichorn. Mr. Anzelc, rebuttal?
Once again, those that are promoting right-to-work legislation, including my opponent who's had a little bit of history with the labor movement and unions in his businesses, are misguided. I believe that is a selfish concept. And I believe, as the late, great Paul Wellstone once said, we all do better when we all do better.
Okay, thank you. Next question is Mr. Scott Hall.
Thanks, Warren. We've heard disturbing stories lately about the plight of homeless people in northern Minnesota, and related to that, how law enforcement officials are often on the front lines dealing with homeless people and those with mental illnesses. How can we do a better job?
Thanks, Scott. That question goes to Mr. Anzelc.
Minnesota's mental health system is in need of serious attention. The 72-hour county lockup is all too often the place where people suffering from mental illnesses end up. We cannot sustain a Minnesota that does not recognize treatment options, treatment availability for people with mental health problems. I am committed to raising the revenue to create the programs, to backfill the programs, to support Minnesota's mental health system. I'm particularly concerned about children's mental health and what is going on with youngsters in our public schools. Closer to home, 4 counties, including Itasca, were shorted a couple of years ago in case management mental health funding. One of my goals going forward in the 2015 session is to fix that problem for mental health case management for those 4 counties, including Itasca.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Anzelc. Mr. Eichorn.
Well, here's one little spot I can agree with you on. I do agree that the mental health system is in dire need of attention and some intervention from the state. I do think we could spend some more of our dollars on mental health. There's a lot of people there. I mean, there's people coming home from the military that have issues. There's people that have had long-time issues that could really benefit from an improved mental health system in the state. The other portion of this question that really didn't get talked about before was how can we deal with the homeless? I served on the Grand Rapids Housing and Redevelopment Authority Board, and I saw the wonderful things that the HRA did as a community for that community in promoting, low-income housing as well as some of the market rate housing they have. But I think on the homeless level, I think that there's probably some more local issues local organizations, I think, that can really go to help some of the homeless more. We have a lot of support right now in Itasca for some of the homeless, but I think there's probably more we could do. But I think that's something that could be done more at the local level, maybe with a little bit of state's help. I don't know. That would be, I think, something that would be good for the locals to decide, because they see those people on a day-to-day basis and maybe have a little better grasp on their specific needs than a group of people in St. Paul deciding what other areas may or may not need.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Eichorn. Mr. Anzelc, any rebuttal?
I like the concept of local control and local management and local decision making. But a problem as immense as homelessness, especially homelessness regarding our veterans coming home from wars. I was proud to support and vote for $100 million in bonding money for homeless programs throughout the state. My hope is that northern Minnesota will be able to compete for and receive a good portion of those dollars so that we can begin to address that homeless problem. But to depend only on local people to generate the revenue, I think, is naive and irresponsible.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Anzelc. Mr. Eichorn, any rebuttal?
I don't think it's necessarily naive to rely only on local people. I think, from serving on the local HRA, I think, well, at least that group has a very good hold on what's going on. And that's a group that has the resources some of the resources to do it already. They could probably use some state help. I'm not naive enough to think that the state doesn't need to be part of the equation, but, those local groups are what really understand what's going on in the community and with the homeless, and I think that working with those groups would do us better than just saying, here's some money, let's just throw money at whatever group we want, and here we go.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Eichorn. Our next question would be from Dennis Wyman.
If elected to the House, how will you vote on tough issues, with your party or with your district? If you answer your district, please cite some examples where perhaps your district might need you to differ with your party.
All right. Thank you, Dennis. That question goes first to Mr. Eichorn.
Well, on tough issues, I think it's more important to vote with your district than with your party. It's important to work with both sides of the aisle. If you want me to cite one issue in particular, we can take the marriage amendment that was on the ballot. 5B overwhelmingly voted to not have gay marriage put in place. They wanted it defined as between one man and one woman in the Constitution. And when it came time to vote for it in the legislature, Tom did end up voting for that. Regardless of where you stand on the issue, he still went against the district on that policy, and that's very unfortunate. But if the community speaks loudly enough and really wants something done and something's important to your area, your district should be more important than party line.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Eichorn. Mr. Anzelc.
I am not in lockstep with any organized group. I'm certainly not in lockstep with the DFL caucus, but I am in lockstep with my friends and my neighbors, the people I see every day, and I'm able to make the hard decisions. An example of not being in lockstep with the majority of my party in the legislature is I have the endorsement of both the Minnesota Gun Owners Alliance and the National Rifle Association. And those are endorsements that not very many of my DFL colleagues from around the state have. I'm proud of those endorsements. It's part of our lifestyle, it's part of our culture, it's the way we live, it's much of what defines us as people from northern Minnesota. Being a legislator in the House of Representatives, whether you're in the majority or in the minority, is hard work. Work ethic, studying, balancing the competing interests of citizens and groups and organizations, because ultimately you can only vote red for no, green for yes. I take a great amount of time in making my decisions, and I'm proud of the decisions I've made, and I'm proud of the progress that we've made for northern Minnesota in the legislature, especially over the last 2 years.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Anzelc. Mr. Eichorn, a rebuttal?
Well, on the marriage issue, it was certainly in lockstep with the Twin Cities Liberals, and looking at some of the voting record you've had, it looks like you line up with the Democrats more than 95% of the time, which I would expect. And the Democrats in the Twin Cities circle, as I would call it, the 494, 694 ring, even more than with the Iron Range Democrats. On the gun rights issue, often I've heard you say that when asked about the Second Amendment, what you think, I know you said you were endorsed by the, whatever it was, the Gun Owners' Rights Alliance. I hear you say it's about the right to hunt, and the Second Amendment is about so much more than the right to hunt. I don't see anywhere in the Second Amendment where it says the right to hunt. It's way beyond that, and if we get a chance to get into that discussion, that would be great too.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Eichorn. Mr. Anzelc, any rebuttal comments?
I support the Second Amendment. Period. End of report.
All right, thank you. Next question would come from Zach Kaiser.
Thank you. Mr. Eichorn touched on this earlier. Should same-sex marriage be legal in Minnesota? Why or why not?
All right. Thanks, Zach. That question goes to Mr. Anzelc.
Yes, it's been decided. I voted for it, and I believe that people have the right to love whom they wish to love.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Eichorn?
On the issue of same-sex marriage, again, I would have sided with my district on that. I think it was a good thing that we allowed the voting public an opportunity to vote on it. If I think the question had been flipped and been on the ballot again, I think it also wouldn't have been put as a constitutional amendment. I think it would have failed again, even if the question was worded the other way. I think from what I've heard from people out door knocking and talking to constituents is that they don't want the state as part of the equation. It should, your marriage should be between you, your partner, your God, and your family, and that's it. The state doesn't have to be part of that equation, and that's where I stand. I don't think the state needs to be involved in it. I think the whole, the marriage issue, gay, straight, or otherwise, it seems to be a revenue source for the state, and I don't really know why the state needs to be in that business.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Eichorn. Mr. Anzelc, a rebuttal?
The boat has left the dock. The elected Minnesota legislature has decided this issue. There are those who want to rewrite history or disregard history or go back, but the people of Minnesota have spoken, and I believe we should go forward.
Okay, Mr. Eichorn, a rebuttal?
I would say the state legislature has spoken, not the people of Minnesota, and that's unfortunate. I would have liked to have seen it on the ballot the other way. Maybe that would have been a better way to put it. Let the people decide again.
Okay, thank
but
you.
The ship has sailed, like Tom said. It's a moot point at this point.
Thank you. Our next question would come from Scott Hall.
Thanks. Right now, Minnesota depends on coal, oil, gas, and uranium from other states and nations for most of our energy. What's your vision for Minnesota's long-term energy needs? And do you see any potential sources for energy production in northern Minnesota or in Minnesota in general?
Okay, thanks, Scott. That question goes to Mr. Eichorn.
Well, I know we're really pushing hard for nuclear, or not nuclear, but wind generated and solar and those types of things. You see, Germany doing kind of well with some of the solar. You see a lot of issues with the wind turbines and stuff down in southern Minnesota that we see a lot. I don't personally have an issue with coal. I think there's an abundant amount of coal in this country. It's cheap. It can be done in a clean method, as like our local Boswell plant is improving and making it cleaner to use coal as a source of energy. Going forward, I don't know if the state needs to put any additional monies into promoting green energy, as it's called. But we need to still encourage these plants that are running, or if they want to continue to do it in a clean and positive method. And again, I don't see any problem with the coal plants we have here as they're continuing to clean up.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Eichorn. Mr. Anzelc.
I believe in renewables, obviously. I think most Minnesotans do. I believe in a balance and a mixture of renewables with baseload fossil fuels. I believe that if science and technology can solve the nuclear waste storage issue, then I think we might see a resurgence and an interest and investment in nuclear power, but not until the storage issue is resolved. I have heartburn over the fact that we are storing spent nuclear fuel on an island in the Mississippi River, half a mile from a Native American Indian reservation in the southeast corner of Minnesota. I think we need to figure out storage. Lastly, it's hard for me to envision running a taconite pellet plant or a paper plant or a wood products facility generating biofuels or bioenergy. It's hard for me to see how we can run those kinds of heavy industrial facilities on anything other than coal or gas in the foreseeable future.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Anzelc. Mr. Eichorn, a rebuttal?
I would agree with Tom that to some degree it's nice that we do need to have some kind of mix, again, more heavily on the coal and that kind of thing. It's okay for private investment or private individuals to maybe put some investment into solar and wind if that's their choice. I don't think that's a business necessarily that the state needs to be in. On the nuclear issue, I can agree with them there to some degree that, the storage is an issue, but I would like to see some, investment there, some, encouragement in being able to promote that and improve that with safe storage options. And like you said, the coal is very, very important to the paper plants and stuff like that. So I think the coal for us in northern Minnesota is important where it needs to stay right now.
Thank you, Mr. Eichorn. Mr. Anzelc, any rebuttal comments?
The utilities, the investor-owned utilities, deserve a thank you, quite frankly, from the citizenry of Minnesota for the tremendous investment and steps that they're taking toward renewables. They can see the future, we can see the future, and the legislature needs to continue to provide incentives so that our air is cleaner, our water is just as pure as it was when we came here, and further generations of northern Minnesotans can enjoy this beautiful place where we live.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Anzelc. Next question would come from Dennis Wyman.
Thanks, Warren. I'd like to go back to probably the most spirited part of the debate so far tonight. You guys clearly have differing views on what supporting the Second Amendment means, and I think our viewers deserve to know what the differences are. Mr. Anzelc, you cited your endorsements from various gun groups. Mr. Eichorn didn't appear real impressed with that. Explain what supporting the Second Amendment means to you and why you feel you are a supporter of the Second Amendment.
Okay, thanks, Dennis. That question first goes to Mr. Anzelc.
The Second Amendment is very, very clear. It provides protections to citizens to keep and bear arms, period. I support the Constitution. I support the Second Amendment. I support all of the amendments. I don't cherry pick. And the Second Amendment is the law of the land. I support it. I stand up for gun rights in the legislature. I stand up for our way of life. I stand up for hunting in our northern Minnesota culture, and I will continue to do so.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Anzelc. Mr. Eichorn?
Well, I take the Second Amendment very literally in the sense that it says shall not be infringed, and that's something we've taken way too far. We've already infringed on the gun rights, and gun rights are much more than about the right to hunt. It's about the right to be able to protect yourself, your family from foreign and domestic enemies, the right to feel secure in your person, the right to be able to, just protect yourself. It's one of our core values in northern Minnesota to be able to carry guns and be able to, hunt with those, protect ourselves, carry on our person. I grew up in a gun store. My family owns an outdoor store that sells firearms, so I'm very involved in the firearm issues and will be the most staunch supporter of gun rights. There will be no wavering for me. It's not just a matter of what the Constitution says, it's also a matter of our livelihood for our family and for our way of life in northern Minnesota. And unfortunately, in the last legislative session, they didn't have it's probably a good thing they didn't have a chance to vote on any gun issues, but sometimes those endorsements come from groups and they, if you didn't have a chance to vote on anything, they always side with the incumbent, and that's fine. I'm secure in my position on gun rights and know that I will be one of the most staunch supporters in the legislature of the Second Amendment and those rights.
Thank you, Mr. Eichorn. Mr. Anzelc, any rebuttal?
I'm pleased that I have the endorsements of the organizations that support the Second Amendment. I'm pleased of my positions that I've taken in the legislature and in the caucus on the issue, and I believe in vigilance, and that is the way I will conduct myself going forward on this issue and many, many, many other issues involving personal freedoms that we enjoy in northern Minnesota.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Anzelc. Mr. Eichorn, any rebuttal comments?
No.
Okay. Okay, our next question would come from Zach Kaiser.
Continuing on the theme of gun control, do you support a law the legislature passed earlier this year that would prohibit people subject to domestic violence restraining orders from possessing firearms?
Okay. Thanks, Zach. That question goes to Mr. Anzelc.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Eichorn?
Can you repeat the question?
Again, this is a law the legislature passed earlier this year that prohibits people subject to domestic violence restraining orders from possessing firearms, and the question is, do you support that or not?
I think to some degree it can be good, but we got to make sure that those people, if cleared, get their firearms back. We need to make sure that, you know, their Second Amendment rights aren't infringed upon. But if they are actually found guilty of domestic violence, then yes, that's fine. But I believe that innocent until proven guilty in this country should continue to stand. And you know, if your neighbor says you're beating up your wife or the other neighbor or whatever, you shouldn't just have your gun taken away based on hearsay. But if you are accused of it, then I don't have any problem with that person losing their firearm.
So to clarify, you would be opposed to taking away or prohibiting people from from who are subject to restraining orders from possessing weapons. You would be opposed to that.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Anzelc, rebuttal?
I'm fine.
Okay. Mr. Eichorn, rebuttal?
Fine.
Okay. I think it's time to move into closing comments. All right. For closing comments, first up is Mr. Eichorn.
Well, first I'd like to take the opportunity to thank you guys again. It was very gracious of you guys to come here tonight and take time out of your busy schedules, I'm sure, to ask questions and moderate this debate for us. I really appreciate you guys. Going forward, I'm just going to keep working as hard as I can to win the election, and if I do, I will do everything I can to represent the district and vote with my district 100% of the time, and listen to the concerns that are truly important to 5B. I thank all of you at home for watching this evening, and I would really appreciate your support and your vote, and if you have more questions for me, certainly reach out. I will email you, call you, whatever you need. Good night and God bless.
Thank you, Mr. Eichorn. Mr. Anzelc, closing comments.
Well, thank you, and I too want to thank the panel and Lakeland Public Television for this great public service that you provide. Northern Minnesota is a better place today than it was 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 6 years ago, 8 years ago. We have managed to grow jobs. We have paid off our public school districts. 2 years ago, the Democrats inherited an $800 million gimmick shortfall in payments to school districts. We've been able to pay that off. In addition to that, we've made our commitment to youngsters in our K-12 system and to our higher ed system extremely high priorities. Kids in the school districts that I represent are receiving per pupil about $950 more of state money for their education than they received 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and 4 years ago. My philosophy is whenever I can get the state to help provide the dollars to pay for educational services rather than local property taxes on our businesses and our homeowners, that's a good thing to do. I've enjoyed this visit here this evening, as I do every 2 years. I've especially enjoyed being here with my opponent, Mr. Eichorn. It is the first time that we've had an opportunity to share views and get to know each other a little bit, and I think that's good for the people. And lastly, please remember to vote on November 4th.
Thank you, Mr. Anzelc. And I'd like to take this time to thank the candidates for participating. It's really important to the members of District 5B to hear your points of view and have a better understanding of the individuals that they're going to vote for. If you missed any portion of tonight's debate and would like to watch it again, it will be available on Lakeland Public Television website within 24 hours. That website is lakelandpublictv.org or lptv.org. Please tune in tomorrow night, 7 p.m., where House 2A, Dave Hancock, Republican, and Roger Erickson, Democrat, will be debating. Good night, and thanks for tuning in.
We see kids using